Uh, Thank you. We wanted to, well, for one thing, we're excited about this forum. It's the third out of four, so we have one more, and we'll tell you more about that later. Um, I'm really, it's been a great thing to be representing MPHA this year as we've gone through so many changes and as public health is more visible than ever. And I just want to recognize the hard work that all of you are doing in all different parts of public health. Um, so our industry, our profession is very strong right now, and there are so many challenges ahead of us in all different areas. So thank you. I wanted to let you know that the event will be recorded today. Cameras may be on or off at your discretion. It's up to you. Please keep yourself muted during the event today. You may use the chat box at any time. Chat on my screen, it's at the bottom. It says little chat, and if I click it, then I can have chat on the right side of my screen. People will be monitoring the chat to check for questions. It's also a great way to network during the meeting. And if you need help, please email info@mpha.net. I believe that's Mary. And if you feel comfortable, rename yourself to include your pronouns. We ask that you take a moment to honor and acknowledge that we are on the ancestral homelands of the Dakota and Anishinaabe. Indigenous people have a long-standing history and connection to the land since time immemorial and are the original stewards of lands and waters. Many American Indians were forcibly exiled from their lands because of aggressive and persistent settler colonialism and US governmental policies, but they persevered. We make this acknowledgement to honor the Dakota and Anishinaabe people, ancestors and descendants, as well as the land itself. Thank you. Now I would, here's the agenda for today. I would like to pass the microphone over to Annie Holland, who will be moderating today's event. Thank you so much to the panel for presenting your expertise and to the committee for organizing today's forum. Annie?
Thank you, Liz, and good morning, everyone. I'm Annie Holland. I'm the County Tribal and Public Health Manager at UCare, and I am pleased to be your moderator today. I was just saying this is the second time I've moderated a forum, but the first time I'm doing one virtually. So I'm happy that we can do this all from our homes, and looking forward to a time when we can get back together live and in person to have some face-to-face conversations. I know that's always a little more enriching, but the virtual has its wonderful attributes as well. Namely that I could kind of roll out of bed, grab my coffee and join this morning. So this morning, I just have a few minutes of introductory remarks, and then I will introduce our wonderful panelists today. And so, you know, I like to take a page from Dr. Ed Allinger's playbook and do a This Day in History. So when I was looking the other day for March 4th, This Day in History, one really caught my eye, and that is just from 10 years ago. So not very distant history. But March 4th, 2012, Vladimir Putin was elected president of Russia for the second time after a brief hiatus as prime minister. And so, of course, it got me thinking, you know, we're living yet again through a time that feels like we're sort of in a very auspicious history-making time, again, for yet another reason. And I was reflecting that, you know, I've got 3 children, and a few of them really love World War I, World War II books. And, you know, as I'm reading those books with them, those dates, you know, 1945 seems very far off, but so it's very alarming to hear the news that just last week was the first time since 1945 that a European nation was invaded by a world power. So, you know, just kind of setting the stage for, you know, we've got a few things going on here, in addition to the other historical piece that we've been living through for the last few years. I continue to think of it as the long tail now that we're in the worldwide pandemic. But, that's really impacted our topic today in a few different ways, I think, and I'm really interested to hear the panelists' discussion about this. But of course, the pandemic has upset, all areas of life, but many that impact food and food access and the food supply chain. So, of course, the first piece was really the jobs impact to income and food security that occurred right as the shutdown happened. And then shortly after, then disrupting the supply chain, which included how food was distributed. I know I personally experienced my school shifting from becoming a place of learning for my children to becoming a food distribution site primarily, where they had drive-ups and bus drop-offs of food for children. Restaurants, took over sidewalks in many cities, and now even more recently, we're still seeing some upset in the food supply chain of, globally. I've heard some news reports about truckloads of rotting fruit at the Chinese border because there's some fear of contamination from food that's coming in from other countries. And then, of course, a lot of this is ending up in what we are experiencing today, which is inflation in costs of all kinds, but in particularly food. I think that's I've heard in my role at UCare from some of our county folks that handle that are social workers helping people access their food benefits, and just hearing that that particularly for seniors that that inflation of food costs really is a big impact for people's day-to-day lives and their budgets. And I'm sure, many of you are experiencing that as well, looking at your own receipts as you go to the grocery store. So meanwhile, those are all kind of impacts I just listed off due to climate change or due to the COVID pandemic. But meanwhile, we have all these, factors that were in play before the pandemic occurred around, climate change, the severe political polarity that has been setting in for a number of years, income inequality, racism, and the long time stripping of native foodways. So all of those things have sort of continued. There maybe has been a little bits of progress here and there, but still these sort of vast forces that are shaping the world that we're living in today. And I'm really excited to think, because we've got some great panelists who are thinking about a lot and dealing with a lot of these questions day to day, and serving our community members who are impacted and needing assistance. So I'm very excited to introduce our panelists today. Unfortunately, I do have to announce that one of our panelists was at the last minute not able to make it, Tina England, and I really would love to hear her perspective as a SNAP benefits coordinator. I think that's a really interesting role that she will be able to provide some kind of on the ground perspective from that side of things. So hopefully we can have her back in a future forum of some kind. But today we do have two wonderful folks. I will first introduce Katie Bull. Katie is the program manager for Foundation for Essential Needs, an entrepreneurial, innovative, and nimble nonprofit focused on increasing the effectiveness and efficiency of local food shelves. And then we have Sophia Lenars-Coy. She's the director of the food group. She loves her job as it gives her the ability to think creatively, collaborate with amazing community partners, and bring good culturally connected food where it is needed most. I will note that there's a link to the agenda in the chat where you can see the full bios for our panelists today. So please take a look and check out the bios there. All right, so I am going to give the panelists a few minutes to each to introduce themselves, and then I will have some specific questions for them as well. So I am going to have Katie go first to have a few minutes to describe some of her work and how it relates to our theme today. Thank you, Katie.
Great. Thank you, Annie, and thank you to everybody. This is wonderful to be here with you all today, and so really excited to hear what you're all thinking about and share a little bit from the world of hunger relief, which obviously our two professions are very much intertwined. And so I just have a few things that I wanted to say first, to tell you a little bit more about Foundation for Essential Needs. So we are a statewide organization. We provide support, consultation, and financial assistance to food shelves across the state of Minnesota, really with an eye towards making sure that the experience that food shelf clients, or as we call them, food shelf shoppers, that the experience they're having in food shelves is as positive and as predictable as possible. My background is actually in food banking, similar to Sophia. And so Sophia and I have been colleagues for quite a while now. And so I actually have worked in two different food banks prior to being at FEN. I worked at Second Harvest Heartland, where Tina England is from, and then also at Second Harvest Northern Lakes in Duluth. And so worked in various different capacities in those two organizations, working with food shelves on both compliance and capacity building, stewarding donor relationships with retailers and restaurants to get that kind of rescued food, as we call it. And then also organizing some pretty large scale food distribution events, as you mentioned, Annie, lots of those popping up during the pandemic. And so I had a role both prior to the pandemic and during the pandemic, where I was organizing some pretty large scale food distribution events. So I wanted to note a few things just as part of my opening comments. So first of all, I think one thing that we often talk about is the change in what we call the hunger relief system. So the network of food shelves, food banks, statewide partners. But if we think about kind of the old vision of what a food shelf was like, it was something that people used in emergency situations. They, lost their job and might have to use it once or twice. Very limited use, oftentimes, kind of handing out a box or a bag of food that people could take home. And this idea that, if people really were in need, they would just kind of take whatever was given to them and should be happy with it, right? And so things are quite different now, and really, that relates to the work that we do, I think, as a hunger relief sector and system, and what is really emerging as important. So, I would say, and what we're seeing, we've got some great data statewide around food shelf use and experiences and foods that people want to see. And so we know that a lot of people are utilizing food shelves on a regular basis now. It is no longer something that they kind of say, oh, I'm going to have to use a food shelf and I hope to never need to do that again. It's something that they're using as a budgeting measure. We know that a lot of the people utilizing food shelves use it on a monthly or very regular basis. And so because of that, there's really an increased importance on providing that positive, dignified, predictable experience when people are accessing food support or accessing a food shelf. And really what we talk about is that that should be as similar as possible to a grocery store. So the choices that we're able to make when we go into a grocery store about what foods we want to pick out, the quality of the foods that we have, the marketing that is done and the way that things look really nice, all are things that we're really thinking about in the food shelf world right now. As I mentioned, there is some great data out there that tells us what shoppers are looking for when they come to a food shelf. And so they tell us, the foods that they most want, which are unsurprisingly the foods that go into making a meal, right? So the proteins, dairy, fresh produce, and then items to kind of make it tasty or to cook with. So your baking and cooking, your spices, your oil, your flour, all of those things. And we really put an emphasis on shopper choice. So the idea that not only people who are utilizing a food shelf can choose the foods that they want, but they can also choose how and when they access those foods. So finding food shelves that work for their timeline, for their schedules, and food shelves that are providing them a positive experience. And so it may not necessarily be the one that's right in their neighborhood. It's whatever one is most convenient for them to access. Just like when people go grocery shopping, you may be stopping at the grocery store that's in between your home and work. I'd say the other thing is really that we're looking at as a sector right now, and that we at FEN are thinking a lot about, is kind of this idea of quality versus quantity. So traditionally, impact in the hunger relief sector has really been driven, I would say, by pounds of food and number of individuals served. And what we're realizing is that, pounds of food could be a lot of things. And so once we kind of drill in and say, well, what are the foods? What are the foods that are being provided? Are they the foods that shoppers are telling us that we want? How often are they able to access these foods? Again, traditionally, food shelves were kind of, you use it once a month and that's your time to go to the food shelf. But we know that when people are accessing grocery stores, we don't just go once a month, right? You got to go on a regular basis to get those fresh items. So really thinking about a lot of different elements of the food shelf system and the hunger relief system beyond just the number of pounds of food that are going out into the community. Some of the questions that were posed prior to, really touched on the pandemic and what we have learned from a global pandemic. And I would say that there have been a lot of learnings in the hunger relief sector in the last 2 years. First of all, I think in a lot of ways, there had been hesitancy to change, to think about doing things differently. And the pandemic really kind of forced food shelves and the hunger relief system to do things very differently, very quickly, right? And so there's kind of this opportunity of, we always thought, oh, we can't do that, or we can't try that, or that seems too difficult. And all of a sudden we were doing it a week after, we were all out in public, hanging out with people and eating at restaurants and all of that. And so I would say that has been something that I have noticed and noted, is that, we really, we can change, right? And it's kind of given people that knowledge that, yep, change is still hard, but we did it and we've been able to pivot. And then it allows us thinking about moving forward. How do we make food shelf operations and the hunger relief sector operations something that's flexible enough? So before we all kind of before everybody came on, we were talking about hybrid online, online in-person events. And so similar to that, we've learned a lot about how people are served. A lot of food shelves went to curbside drive-up models. And I would say from my own experience working in food shelves during that time, it was incredible to see how quickly we could serve a large number of people when they weren't all coming into a building and shopping. So realizing that, yes, choice and being able to choose your own foods is still very important. But as I mentioned, there's more to choice than just that. There's choice about how you spend your time. And so, if you need to wait an hour in order to get in and shop at a food shelf, that might not be the best use of your time. And so thinking about how we can provide hybrid options that allow for people to make the choice in the way that they're accessing foods as well. The other thing I would say about the pandemic is that it really normalized accessing food support. And I think that's been a really interesting thing. And I say normalized in quotes, that like, because everybody was going through a pandemic, it was kind of this idea that everybody was in a tough spot. And so because of that, and because of some loosening of restrictions around how people accessed foods, there was kind of more anonymity around accessing foods with some of these drive-through models. Saw a lot more people accessing foods and really coming out of the woodwork, people who traditionally would not be going to brick and mortar food shelves. Angie, I should have paid better attention when I started talking. Am I about at time, or should I? Okay, I'm doing okay.
Yeah, you got
okay,
it.
Sounds good. All right. So I just have a couple more things that I wanted to say. So again, the other thing that happened in the pandemic was that we really saw a lot of food and a lot of funds available for the hunger relief system. It was kind of this, hidden system in some ways before, and then people really realized the importance to our community. I would say probably similar to public health, right? Like all of a sudden we're hearing a lot from public health, and all of a sudden, the hunger relief system is becoming something that there's a lot more attention paid to, funding lots of free food. And so the other thing that happened during this time is that food shelves really had the flexibility to do things a little bit differently, because they had so much food, because they had these funds, they had so much free food coming in. And so food shelves tried out just letting people take unlimited amount, whatever they wanted from their shelves. They were allowing unlimited visits. And what that really did, there was this idea that, if you allow people to take as much as they want and come back as often as they want, they're just going to take everything. And that wasn't the case, right? So it kind of disproved this idea that if we allow more flexibility and more frequency, that people would almost take advantage of it. Actually saw almost the opposite in some situations, where people wanted a little bit more guidance of like, well, how much should I be taking? And so very interesting things just that allowed us as a sector to kind of test out. The final thing that I will say is that while I was working at the Duluth Food Bank, and I think this kind of goes to the question about culturally appropriate foods, indigenous foods, there was, again, a lot of funding available. And so being in Duluth, we recognized that there were a lot of Ojibwe communities, Anishinaabe communities in our region, and we wanted to support them with foods that would be culturally appropriate. And very quickly realized, as Sophia is probably an expert in this, that it wasn't very easy to get large quantities of some of these foods, because they weren't used to selling them in this kind of wholesale market. And so I actually had the opportunity to be a part of a group based out of the Wisconsin food banks that was looking at some culturally appropriate foods for elders in the region, and wanted those foods to be made up entirely of local indigenous food offerings. And so this idea of the hunger relief system, and again, Sophia will probably tell you a lot more of this, but this idea of the hunger relief system really being used to not only support people who are in need of food, but people who are producing food, and culturally appropriate foods at that. And so I will just, as my last comment, I will just give a shout out to Sophia and the food group, because they have done some amazing work in providing culturally appropriate foods, really understanding what communities are looking for. And we at FEN had the opportunity to work with a new food shelf in the Lower Sioux Reservation called Kenseapi that was able, due to the foods that the food group was able to source, to open up a new food shelf, having bison, having wild rice, having walleye, and really provide a very culturally rooted experience for the people who are utilizing the food shelf. So I'm looking forward to hearing questions from you and talking more, but I will stop there and pass it over to Sophia.
Wonderful, thanks.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Katie and Annie, and all of you for inviting me. I'm Sophia. I'm the executive director of the food group. Certainly, we get to collaborate with FEN on doing some of their great transformations. Really, they're doing such good work at getting into really localized communities and helping food shelves adapt and change to what we all know is an ever-changing environment. So really important work in the sector, and public health has been incredibly instrumental in shaping the Minnesota kind of healthy food response over these last many decades. So I have been in the food work, the nonprofit food space for about 15 years now. And again, I think I'm really struck with in Minnesota the unique ecosystem that we work in that there are public health folks, there are anti-hunger folks, there are local agriculture folks who, even though there are times when maybe our aims rub up against each other, we know we're stronger together, right? And I think that it has been huge and really set Minnesota's food system up to weather some of the storms that we've seen these past couple years. So Katie did a really great job of kind of doing a nice deep snapshot of the hunger relief system. So I won't do much more in that other than to say, I think that I remember a time where the concept of nutrition was incredibly controversial in hunger relief. I am so happy to report I hardly ever talk about it anymore because we have moved on. We all have understood, thanks in large part to that advocacy of local public health, that what is distributed in the emergency food system needs to be healthy. Those are the foods that are hardest to get other places. So, I mean, I remember in 2008, the food group developed a healthy foods policy. There were fights at our board meeting, right? It was this idea that any food is good food, right? That wasn't that long ago. Those conversations are so far in the past, I would say, for 99% of folks distributing free food. And again, I credit that to public health tremendously. So I would say the piece in the hunger relief system that the food group is really working on, Katie mentioned culturally appropriate foods. That's something we're really working to think about, and also where we source, right? And so thinking of ourselves not only as trying to find the cheapest foods, but also that we can use our buying power to support local vendors and local producers, to support women-owned businesses, to support farmers of color, or food entrepreneurs from different cultural communities, right? And understanding that even though some of those foods might be a little bit more expensive per item, that act of purchasing can help create, right, a food system that can weather future storms. And I think that was another really interesting thing that happened in the pandemic when the supply chain got so difficult. You saw a huge rise in people visiting farmers markets or joining community supported agriculture CSAs, right? And so the food group is kind of in an interesting place in that we have 3 program areas. So we support food shelves and meal programs. That's where we do a lot of our collaboration with FEN. We also have 2 affordable grocery programs, Fair for All and Twin Cities Mobile Market. So understanding that we know food is a patchwork, people are getting free food, they're also purchasing food. We got to make sure those foods are affordable, accessible, and healthy. And then we also have a farm. And we are a land-based education program for immigrant and refugee farmers. So folks that historically have not had access to land or capital. And what's really interesting about those three areas of our work is because we sit inside a global food system, right? Which, you know, Annie, I appreciated you mentioning even the situation in Ukraine. I think there's a lot of question marks about what that will do to global food supply, right? We sit in this global food system, and that means that for a farmer to earn a living wage, right, often those products are out of reach financially to some folks who are on really limited incomes. And so at the food group, we just kind of sit with that tension, right? So we have programs where we're about supporting farmers, and that's the focus of those programs. We have other programs where we are needing to, like Fair for All, find a really good deal on, you know, chicken breast, because that's what our customers are telling us that they can't access, you know, any other place. And so I think sitting within the system that we live in, understanding the system, some people talk about a broken food system. I've been really struck with people who say the food system isn't broken, but it has been built intentionally. And it has been built intentionally to benefit some at the expense of others. And so how we work to, I certainly don't have the audacity to believe that the food group alone can level the playing field, but how we work programmatically to think about where we can put our resources to best respond to community need, and how we can move resources differently to know that we can't just keep doing the same thing we've done, right? And reflecting on the past 2 years, I mean, they have been unlike any, right, that any of us have ever seen. I think, you know, Katie did a good job of mentioning that scale and pace of innovation. The piece I'll add to it is I cannot in my own head tease apart what have been the impacts of COVID and what have been the impacts of the murder of George Floyd and the unrest that followed. Because especially in the free food distribution space, community organizations had to mobilize for both of those crises simultaneously. And there was a really interesting movement that arose around mutual aid. So groups who decided we don't need to be a 501c3. We can be neighbors who help other neighbors. That's something our team is really trying to understand, because there was a real beautiful, this is such a non-public healthy term, feeling. I had a really good feeling about those distributions. Oh my gosh, that all of you are gonna be like, where are your promising practices? That's why I partner with public health people. I don't think like that. But the mutual aid really shifted some of the power dynamics that have been so kind of baked in to some of how food has been distributed for a long time. And it's something that we're really interested in continuing to explore at the food group, of how can we make sure that we're empowering community members to solve this in the way that they know how, not in a way that a big organization is saying, here's a box of food. So I'm going to stop there. I'd much rather be in conversation with all of you, but those are some of my initial thoughts.
Well, thank you so much, both of you. Sophia, I'm going to riff on your feelings just for a minute, because that's, you know, we're all humans with feelings, and that actually these, you know, stories, I think, really pull us along and keep us going in our work, and remind us of why we're, you know, doing the programs that we're doing, or planning what we're planning. And I was really struck, Katie, by your comment about that, you know, one of the learnings was that, you know, we disproved that theory that folks would just take as much as they can. And I think, Sophia, you also, you know, just touched on that with the movement towards mutual aid. And I think those two things sort of rest on that same concept of, you know, regardless of all the cynical, you know, stuff swirling around us, people are generally good. and generally want what's good for their community and for their neighbors. So you see that in people taking, just what they need and not wanting to take more and potentially leave not enough for their neighbors. And so I really appreciate that that call out, because I think it is, as I said, too easy to get cynical and also to make assumptions, as professionals that, we get stuck in these modes of thinking and take some of those as fact when actually we know that we need to actually rethink some of those assumptions. So thank you for pulling that out, because I just think that's really key to revising how we're thinking about everything. And Sophia, thank you for talking as well about the sort of key role of public health. And it just struck me as you were talking that, we don't have a SHIP person on the panel, but because I think part of what you're referring to, I assume, has to do with SHIP, which was put in place 2006 or somewhere a while ago now. So it's had the time to really take root and to start shaping, hopefully, some of those collaboratives you talked about. So I am, I think kind of my next question, I want to shift to some of those pieces you talked about in terms of, I think I was hearing a theme about resiliency, sort of about how those multiple sectors coming together to shape the food system does help to create, potentially more ability to be nimble and to react in really positive ways in these emerging, as these emerging things pop up. I wanted to ask about climate resiliency and how that plays into any of your work. What are some of the key steps that we need to take in bolstering our climate resiliency? And when I think about this, I think more about the food production side, but I mean, I of course there are steps all along that way, from production to distribution, and so just would like to hear I think from both of you on that question.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I think that is certainly it's one of the many unknowables, right, of kind of what the food system looks like in 5, 10, 15 years and beyond, right? So I think certainly from a local farming perspective, I mean, last year we had a terrible drought, right? The well at our farm ran out of water more than once. And so the idea that it's something in the future, right? If you talk to anyone farming, they will say it's absolutely here now. And that the unpredictability, right? That there can be a drought and then such heavy rain that it washes out your road, and then you're fixing that. And then, right. So it's already there. I think another piece, especially on the local farming side, we often hear about crop insurance. That really is something designed for big farmers, often commodity farmers. So most folks who are growing fruits and veggies, the things that are really healthy to put in our bodies, right, don't qualify for crop insurance. And so climate impacts and the unpredictability of climate can absolutely wipe out an entire season's income, right, for a small farmer. So I think that's really real and true. There's, I think, some good momentum, right, on how to be better stewards of our land, how we do cover cropping, how we think about resting soil, keeping practices organic, those kind of things. So certainly those are practices that we train our farmers at Big River Farms, right, to use and think about. And I think the Department of Agriculture in Minnesota is doing some, really good work, both with emerging farmers and conventional farmers, about how do we think more about climate resiliency. On the food shelf side, and Katie will be much better suited to speak about this part than I will. I really see the linkage around food rescue. And so I think one of the ways that the hunger relief system helps with climate resiliency is making sure that food doesn't just go in a landfill. So Katie knows much more about that. At the food group, the places that we focus in terms of food rescue are we do food rescue from the Minneapolis Farmers Market. And then we also do something called gleaning. So we bring volunteers to farmers' fields who have excess produce but don't want to pay labor to pick the produce, because that can be a very expensive part of the process. And so we can bring volunteers out to pick that food that would otherwise go to waste. So those are a couple things that come to mind for me.
Yeah, thanks, Sophia. I was thinking the same. I'm like, okay, Sophia's got the farming, view of this, but honestly, I'm so glad that you brought up gleaning, because probably 15 years ago, that was my first introduction to the food group. Back when you were the Emergency Food Shelf Network, was going around to people's individual pear trees and harvesting those pears that otherwise were just going to fall on the ground. I had no idea we grew pears in Minnesota. So that was a huge learning for me. I think just to kind of follow up on that gleaning and that side of things, the produce and the farming, there has been some great work in the state of Minnesota through the Department of Agriculture to not only do, what Sophia is talking about, with this gleaning, but actually kind of a similar program where the Department of Agriculture is paying farmers, like Sophia said, that cost to harvest their foods instead of plowing them under when they're not meeting the level of quality or shape or whatever it might be that they would then sell on to a grocery store, right? And so a lot of the produce that is moving through the hunger relief system in Minnesota during our growing months is coming from those farms. And so not only is that a great way to utilize those crops, it's also a great way to get those fresh produce items out to people who most of the time cannot afford to buy them themselves. On the food rescue end, I would say that is huge. If you are familiar at all, the USDA has a food waste pyramid. And what it does is it talks about how food that is not going to be utilized should then be, or is not going to be sold, I guess, should be dealt with. And so the idea is that if you've got food that is still good to eat, whether it's from a restaurant, a grocery store, a stadium, anything like that, the first step in that process should be going to people who are in need and people who are utilizing food shelves. And so really this growing movement of working with retailers, working with restaurants to make sure that the food that they're not going to sell is put to good use. So before we think about composting or pig food, and of course, before we think about landfill, the first step in that is getting that food to people who could still eat it, because it's still good, nutritious food. A lot of times they just have too much, or maybe there's a little bruise on it, but it's still food that if you took it out of your refrigerator, you'd go, yep, that looks good. I'm still going to put that into my meal tonight. And then the final thing I would say, and it kind of goes in contrast, but I think it's important to understand the way that the hunger relief system in our country was built. So one of the main sources of food that flows through is called TFAP. It is through the USDA, and it actually is part of the Farm Bill. And so if you follow any of the legislation or the advocacy that is happening around food support, including SNAP, you'll hear that being linked to the Farm Bill and to the Federal Department of Agriculture. And so I think the interesting thing to note about that is that a lot of those foods are coming from farmers, from producers, from growers, when it's a way for the government to keep those costs level for the producers. So basically, if people aren't buying pork anymore, the pork producers could say, okay, well, we're going to have to charge more because people aren't buying it. So in order to keep our business going, it's going to be more expensive. And the government steps in and says, nope, keep your prices the same. We'll buy the excess that you have, and then we'll flow it into the emergency food system. And so I think the interesting thing about that is that, again, like Sophia was mentioning, it is very much tied to big farmers, and to a nationwide food system, really not thinking about those smaller farmers. And so I always reflect on that, of just how interesting it is to me that this whole system that we've built, that has been built up, including SHIP, really flows from the idea of supporting big farmers in our country. And the fact that we get this food is great for the system, but in some ways it's kind of an afterthought. It's not the main purpose of all of that. So I could nerd out about that for a long time, so I'll stop there.
That's what we're here for. We're for nerding out together. Well, thank you so much. And I'm just keeping an eye on the time, and it looks like we are at 8:45, which is our time to initiate breakout sessions, I believe. So I think Jean was gonna get us going there. Not Jean, no.
Hi, Annie. I'm here. It's Lindsay.
Lindsay.
Thank you
Thank you.
so much. Yes, now is the time where we would love for you all to continue your conversations in a small group format and come up with a couple of questions with your group. And then we'll share them back here to me, to Lindsay Fabian through the chat when we come back. So please accept your group invitation that Mary will be launching now, and we'll see you back here in a few minutes. And please introduce yourselves and come up with a few good questions for our panel when we come back. Thank you, and see you all in a few minutes. Okay, it looks like people are heading off to their rooms. Very good. All right. Let's see. We have a few people in the main room here. Let's see. Maya, everybody. We're starting the recording again. Welcome back. Welcome back. I hope you came up with some good questions in your breakout spaces. Please, through the chat, send your questions to me, to Lindsay Fabian, and I will deliver them to our moderator. So while you are getting your questions typed up, I'm going to turn it back over to Annie to kick it off with more questions for our panelists. And please feel free to route questions to me. Thanks, everyone. All right, back to you, Annie.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for coming back from your breakout groups. And we had our own discussion with the panelists and the organizers. And one question that popped up for us was, what can we learn from any examples from outside of the United States in terms of food rescue or production or distribution? Are there any learnings that you all can relay?
Yeah, so I have an example, and it really is tied to the way that we use food rescue to feed people in a food shelf setting or in a food support setting. So there's a food shelf out in Woodbury that has started some kind of different locations of what they call today's harvest. And so thinking about this idea came from one of their volunteers visiting, and she's actually one of the board members for FEN. And every time she goes anywhere, she seeks out the nearest food distribution or food bank or food shelf and goes to see what they're doing. So she was in Australia and saw this model. And what the model was that it was really kind of leaning into this idea. I kind of think of it as like the European way of shopping, that it's not going to the grocery store once a week and stocking up and bringing it all home. It's like stopping at the corner market on the way home and getting things for dinner and things like that. And so the idea behind this food support mechanism was that people are invited to come back as often as they like. And a lot of people are coming on a daily basis. And so this opened up, I think, probably about a year ago in Oakdale, and now they're expanding to some additional locations. But it is all based, it is totally kind of funded or kind of stocked with food rescue, with retail rescue. And so they're getting, truckloads of rescue directly from a grocery store. Again, as I mentioned, these are things that, we just got in, 4 more pallets of watermelons. We still have 2 pallets of watermelons on the floor. We're going to put our new watermelons out, and we just want to get rid of those other 2 pallets of watermelons. And so they're bringing this great food into the market, merchandising it in a way that it looks really appealing and looks just like a grocery store. And after I'm done saying this, I'll put the link in the chat so you can see some of the pictures of what it looks like. But the other great thing about that is I was kind of mentioning some of the federal support and the federal programs around food support and food sources. And because they're federal programs, they have their own regulations as far as what people need to tell the food shelf. And so when you're working in that federal program, you have to say, here's my name, here's the people in my family, here's my address, and give all of that information to the food shelf. Because today's harvest model is based completely on rescue food, they basically just come in and get what they want, and they're tracking that, but it's a very minimally, I guess I would say, invasive process. It's just like walking into the grocery store and picking out what you want, except you're not paying for it. So kind of combining that idea of frequent shopping with rescue food, and really the best way to utilize that rescued food is to use it right now while it's still good, and get it out to people so they can put it in their refrigerator and eat it a few days later.
I love that. Yeah, it seems like a really great efficiency. Sophia, did you have any example you wanted to relay, or otherwise I can move to the next question?
I think the only thing I'll just kind of mention, we talked a little bit in our group about just the important role that public policy plays on shaping the context of any of these responses. And so, we talked a little bit about how there is something uniquely American about the way that business and money and lobbying influence, right, can be combined. And so I do think that, big conventional, agribusiness, and even big kind of global food manufacturing business, right, wields a lot of influence on how the government chooses to support food policy, or where the subsidies go, or some of those things. So I do think it's just really important to look at that kind of political reality. And, ultimately, right, we need to do better at food distribution, of course. It becomes much less important if there's a super strong public safety net where everyone has enough income. So the truth is, the reason Katie and I even have jobs is that we do not have the political will or public policy to get everyone the income that they need. And so I just think that's a really important piece to remember.
Right. Thank you for that. And I think I'll make sure to, before I pass the mic back over, to ask you all for any recommendations in terms of policy or advocacy options too, because I know that's always something that this group is interested in. I had a question from one of the breakout groups. They're asking about how can we help farmers transition if they want to move to more sustainable options that would increase food diversity and access?
Good question. There are lots of groups. I think the best start is University of Minnesota Extension has extension educators that really can help connect farmers. There are funding mechanisms, environmental easements, those kind of things that can help incentivize some of those transitions. So I would say a good first connect would be the U of M extension educators.
I would just add on to that on the, the conversation around farmers, BIPOC farmers and farmers that really trying to figure out the right way to say this, the fact we've screwed up their ability to farm in the way that they have learned to farm as cultures. And so trusting in like we were talking about, these farmers that are coming from other countries and going, yeah, you can grow that here, you can grow this here, or like bringing these techniques that originated in Africa, in Asia, and in all of these different countries that, at this point in our history as a country, we're like, oh, those people don't know how to farm. And it's like, no, they were the ones that brought like a lot of these techniques to us in the first place. And so I would say like trusting in the knowledge that people have. And if anybody's ever, if you drive down Highway 52, there's the Hmong American Farmer Association. I forget what it's called, but just amazing fields full of these like limited plots, and just they know what they're doing. They totally know what they're doing, and we just need to learn from them.
Thank you so much. So there was a question too. I'm just getting some more of the breakout questions. Looking for more information about involving Black farmers and supporting their work in Minnesota. I don't know if there's any more you can share, Sophia, about your farm.
Yeah, so, Big River Farms, we absolutely are focused on supporting farmers of color, immigrant refugee farmers as well. But we are, a cross-cultural group, which is really interesting. Many languages spoken in our education program. There are other groups that are more culturally specific, right? So Katie mentioned HAFA, the Hmong American Farmers Association. They're really working with Hmong farmers. Dream of Wild Health is working really primarily with Native farmers on indigenous crops. And then the other group that I would point out is their Midwest Farmers of Color is doing quite a bit around kind of advocacy and other things about that. And then Kilomo Farms, one of actually a Big River Farms program graduate named Moses, has started his own farm for African farmers. So there's a lot of different groups going more culturally specific in terms of building those kind of communities. We tend to be kind of cross-cultural in our approach. Both things have, really strong strengths and other, things that are more challenging about that. But certainly nationally, there is a movement around, Black farming. Soul Fire Farms out in New York is doing some amazing kind of thought leadership around that. So I would say, there's a lot of resources. It's certainly something, when you look at kind of the history of agriculture, right, in the US, all of the agricultural land that we use was stolen from, Native peoples. And was mostly cultivated or the kind of agricultural system built up on slave labor, right? So I think both Black farmers and indigenous farmers really need, have that history at the kind of forefront of what they're doing and thinking about.
That was exactly what I was thinking, Sophia. I just put the link for Soul Fire Farm in the chat because, yeah, that was going to be my comment.
Oh, Annie, you're muted, I think still.
It had to happen once. Check that bingo box. There's a question here about the role of the school. And I don't know how much you all are interact with schools as they're in their role in the food distribution system, but as I mentioned in the opening, just the shifting related to the pandemic, and now some potential upcoming teacher strikes in Minneapolis and St. Paul, some of the larger districts in our state. Do you see, do you have any thoughts about, sort of those school-based resources and how they can be better leveraged or differently leveraged?
Yeah, I mean, one of my initial things I was going to mention at the end in terms of a policy update, but the governor released his budget, and one of the things in that budget is the healthy, hunger-free kids. So basically, universal school meals. And so, that is something that a lot of food organizations are really supportive of, primarily because school meals are really consistent for kids, right? And if we can destigmatize the school lunchroom and breakfast, right, and have that be nutrition that everyone is getting regardless of income, it eliminates lunch shaming, right? It destigmatizes. There's lots of studies that show it encourages more participation from everyone in school lunch, which actually helps school nutrition have bigger budgets to buy the foods that they need too. So it also relieves pressure from the emergency food system. We know that, summers are hard when kids don't have those meals. We know that with the pandemic, when schools were shut, even with schools as distribution hubs, it's not the same. And so absolutely, school meals are an important part of the picture. And for us, it's, again, universal school meals seems like a really good way to kind of take money out of the equation for kids.
Yeah, I would agree. I think stigma is such a huge thing across the entire hunger relief system, but it really does show up in schools. And so when you think about other food support that is available, whether it's, a weekend backpack program or a produce distribution, I will say, like, it is unfortunate, but the places that are easiest to get food to people, historically, when we were looking at like those students that were getting free and reduced lunch and those that weren't, you could just go into a school that had a high percentage of free and reduced lunch and just make it available to everybody. And so I love the idea of having it be universal, and thinking about, from some of our learnings from the pandemic, like, do we really need to have as many guardrails and barriers around food access, or can we really just trust people to access the food when they need it? Because, again, back to like, there's this misconception of like, oh, people are going to take advantage of it if we're not like policing these resources. And the reality is like, just think about yourself. Like, why would you go to like the trouble and the effort and all of that to walk into a food shelf or get support if you didn't actually need it? So I am hopeful that this universal school lunches is kind of the first of some loosening that will allow people to not feel like they have to just like tell their whole life story in order to get food support.
Thank you so much. And I think just in the last, I know I'm not going to be able to get to all the questions, so apologies, but wanted to mention too, as you were talking about the universal school meal programs, that is something that the MPHA did pass a resolution recently, and in support of that policy. What are some other resolutions or legislative action that you would recommend to support food access, sustainable farming, and distribution?
I'm not coming up with good ones off the top of my head. The two groups that so the national group that I follow, which probably many of you do too, is FRAC, right? I think they are often a really good resource for kind of food related national level policy. Farm bill negotiations will start kind of kicking off probably in 2023. So that will certainly be something to watch at the national level. At the state level, there definitely, again, in the governor's budget are some appropriations specifically for the emergency food sector. So I know there's $15 million ask for kind of infrastructure support and grants and those kind of things. So I don't know that any of those have been kind of coded into legislation yet. It's that we're in that time where the governor said what he wanted, and then now the legislators have to get their act together. So I would say the two groups locally that I follow are Partners to End Hunger, which is an advocacy coalition coordinated by Hunger Solutions. So I really track their legislative agenda. And then the Land Stewardship Project, they tend to do more around kind of sustainable agriculture at the local level. So I kind of look at both of those groups for coalition-based legislative agendas.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, really timely because there is the Hunger Day on the Hill is coming up this coming Tuesday, and I'll put a link to more information about that, coordinated by Hunger Solutions and the Partners to End Hunger group. So I would say, yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that we are seeing, so we've gone through both with the pandemic and with some of the trade issues that were happening with America not being able to sell a lot of our goods and things to other countries. Gone through a time when there were a lot of food resources available, and now we are in a time when a lot of that has dried up. And so we know that the need is still there, and we also have seen the incredible impact that being able to just have all that food and not worry about how much it's going to cost a food shelf to bring in enough great healthy food to really meet the needs of the people who are coming in and shopping. That has made an incredible impact. And so that's the other thing I would say. And I think that's, Sophia is probably better versed in this than I am. And truly, I think we do have, we have some really strong partners in this sector that help on that advocacy end. And so I'm definitely not an expert, but I think that's included in a lot of these things that we're talking about, and on the federal level too, of like, let's make sure that we have the funding to bring in these really high quality foods and really boost things up to a level that is predictable, because we want these services to be predictable for the people who are coming into a food shelf. That is so important when we're kind of fighting against this scarcity mindset that is ever present in poverty. And yeah, how do we, I mean, to Sophia's thing, like, how do we sustain this? But we need food shelves to be able to feel like they can continue to sustain what they're doing and provide a predictable experience. And unless that food is flowing through, it's not going to happen. So yeah, a lot of stuff happening in our worlds right now where it's like, we kind of saw what it could be, and are hoping that there's some opportunity to keep it like that.
Well, thank you so much. Before I let you go, I had one question that I'm kind of taking off the submitted questions from the panel or from the breakouts, asking about volunteer opportunities. I think you all mentioned gleaning, which was something I learned today. I didn't know that was a thing. And where would you direct people if they were interested in volunteering?
So I have to be self-promotional, right? So the foodgroupmn.org. It's important that I know our website. But if you go to the food group's website, we have volunteer opportunities, lots of volunteer opportunities at our warehouse to sort and pack. When the growing season starts, absolutely. Every Sunday we have a farmers market rescue opportunity, and it's really fun because you get to talk to all the vendors and see what they want to donate. Gleaning in the growing season as well. And then our Twin Cities mobile market program has the opportunity to volunteer out at stops too. So all of those are on our website, but then local food shelves too. I think one thing that's real is, as the pandemic has impacted different people's comfort level, I think there's been a lot of shifting in the volunteer base in general. So that's certainly an opportunity. And, if you need help connecting with a local food shelf, like Food Group or FEN can help. Otherwise, there's a great food shelf map at Hunger Solutions website too. So kind of finding, whoever's in the local scene, is what I would say.
Well, I'm glad you're being self-promoting because I am going to be self-promoting too. First of all, I will say the food group is an amazing place to volunteer and will really has a very hyper local uh, feel and mission, and I just love the work that they do. And so I would totally support being involved in the food group and being around the wonderful people that work and volunteer there. I will say, and then also echoing what Sophia said about volunteering at your local food shelf. I would also say, so our team at FEN is a small team, and we rely really heavily on skilled-based volunteers. And so we often appeal to people who have some specific skills that they really would like to share with the hunger relief sector. And that could be around data analysis. It could be around, creating new layouts for a food shelf. It could just be around helping food shelf through change. If you're really into change management and project management, we're always looking for people to help with that. And so we couldn't do what we do without our volunteers. And so if you are looking for something that's skill-based and you get a lot of responsibility and you're probably going to be thinking about it after you go home, and all of those different things, like I would just also say check out FEN. We're always looking for additional volunteers too.
Great. Well, thank you so much to our panelists, Katie Ball and Sophia Linares-Coy. This has been a really wonderful discussion. I really appreciate your time, and I know everyone on today has really learned a lot as well. I've got a minute or two to wrap up, and then I'll hand it off to Liz to close us today. But just in terms of sort of the themes that I've heard today, really, heartened. I guess I would say I'm heartened to hear about the really thoughtful work that is happening, across the system, from ag development to hunger relief to rescue. Also, just with a tinge of concern about, what is the sustainability, as we sort of got to a little later on in the conversation. Is this something I think, and I'm thinking the same too about public health, that we know it's, as a profession, public health has certainly come under scrutiny, but there's also been a lot of focus and interest. And similarly, food supports have grown in the need and the capacity. How are we going to sustain that into the future? And I do, I appreciate, just in this time of just grave uncertainty, frankly, globally, that, hearing some of the stories about the general goodness of people that you're seeing every day, and in terms of how the system has, what has been learned throughout the pandemic, and just noticing trends towards, really wanting to have that community-minded approach. So I think I'll wrap it up there, and I'll hand it over to Liz. But again, thank you for all the work you're doing and for your time this morning. And I know that there's a lot of folks, as I mentioned, interested in the advocacy pieces. So thank you for also pointing us to those resources and collaborative groups, because I know hopefully some folks will have some energy towards that, and will be looking for actions that they can take in the near future to make improvements. So thank you. So Liz.
Well, thank you everyone for being here. And I want to thank the Friends of the Forum who are listed on this slide. Friends of the Forum have given an extra donation in order to support the whole year of programming for the forum. So when you become a member of MPHA, that's an option you can choose when you register for your next forum next week. I really want to thank the committee and just because they've put together such thoughtful programming for this year, and really brought us some great food for thought today as we kind of check in on all different parts of of the work we do. Thank you to our sponsors, Alina Medica, and others. We have had great support for MPHA and for our sponsors. And yeah, thank you, going back one more, thank you to our panelists for being here and for sharing your expertise and your knowledge. There's so much that we have to learn about each other. And I think that Annie covered it all, but thank you so much for coming and giving us an update on your work. There's a few things I'd love for you to know about. You can become a member. You can join MPHA at mpha.net. We are an independent voice for public health in Minnesota. And so MPHA, I think, can be a great place, place to bring things. Somebody in one of my small groups was mentioning that there's probably more that MDH and the Department of Agriculture could be doing to work together. MPHA could be the kind of outside voice that could, start that conversation from the outside of the system instead of from the inside of the system. So there's so many ways that MPHA can partner with and bring our over 350, 400 members to some of these policy conversations. And then I want to make sure that you know about our conference that's coming up. Sorry, okay, go back. Skipping ahead, I was going to do conference and then the next. Our last policy forum of the year is May 6th. Please register. We continue the theme, local and global, what can we do for each other? And on Friday, May 6th, we'll be talking about challenges in a coordinated global response. That should be fascinating and timely. And also, please register on May 12th and 13th for our annual conference, Together for Planet and Community. We have a great program coming together. It's available on mpha.net. You can register. It's we would love to have lots of registrations. We're doing it virtually one more time because we love the reach that it gives us to participate virtually. And we've structured it so that we have some really good interaction going on throughout the conference. So check it out, register, get involved with MPHA, and think about us as an ally. Thank you all for attending. Thank you for being here today for a great conversation.